lifetime, British cartoonist George Ernest Studdy and his little dog Bonzo were international celebrities, but nowadays both of them are largely forgotten. Studdy was born in Plymouth in 1878 and he attended Heatherley's Art School in London before assembling a portfolio and hawking it around London's publishing houses. It took him a couple of years, but by 1900 he was getting regular work from some of the comics of the day. He also had early success with a series of postcards titled The Evolution of the Motor Car. But most significantly, the Sketch magazine gave him a contract for a full-page illustration every week, and by the end of the first decade of the 20th century, he had plenty of regular work. When the Great War broke out in 1914, Studdy wasn't able to fight due to a childhood injury, so his contribution to the war effort came in the form of propagandist illustrations, postcards, and a series of animated films called Studdy's War Studies. The first film was released in December 1914, and although it looks remarkably crude by modern standards, at the time it was considered a marvel of the modern age. Over the years, Studdy became known for the amusing dogs which featured regularly in his work, and in 1920 the editor of the Sketch suggested a series of illustrations with a dog as the main character. Bonzo made his debut, and he was an instant popular success. And by the end of the decade, Studdy and his family were living very comfortably in 3 floors of the Kensington apartment block they owned, and they were employing a handful of domestic staff. With his background in comics, Studdy had developed an expressive calligraphic pen and ink technique, and his colour work, which was frequently printed as duotone, was usually created with washes of watercolour to flesh out the character and background elements. It's only a guess on my part, but I think it's highly likely that he also used gouache for the larger flat areas of some illustrations. In 1924, Studdy began working on the first of 26 animated silent films featuring the adventures of Bonzo. And with a team of animators, he created a slapstick series which made the little dog a star across Europe and in America, where he had become a serious rival to Felix the cat. Businesses were queuing to get in on the act, and an overwhelming amount of merchandise was produced. There were cuddly and mechanical toys, all manner of household objects, games and jigsaw puzzles, books and hundreds of postcards. Advertisers were also keen to exploit Bonzo's popularity in press ads and posters, and he even featured as a neon sign in London's Piccadilly Circus. Given this level of popularity, it seems odd that in 1927 the publishers of the Sketch asked Studdy to come up with something new. He tried a series with a motoring theme, but it wasn't popular with the readers. And following this failure, he took a break from the Sketch and reappeared a year later with Ulu the cat. But Ulu never reached anything like the same level of enduring appeal as Bonzo, who was still the nation's favourite. Then came World War II, and Studdy abandoned illustration altogether and moved to Portsmouth, where he worked as a draftsman for the Navy, while his wife and daughter spent the war in the safety of the Lake District. In their absence, their London home was badly damaged in an air raid, and a lot of Studdy's original artwork was lost in the rubble. After the war, Bonzo's popularity began a rapid decline, so Studdy tried a new series of postcards in the style of the hugely popular adult humour cards of Donald McGill. They were far from vulgar, but he signed them with the alias Cheero rather than tarnish his reputation. In 1947 he began to suffer severe chest pains, and George Studdy died of cancer in London the following year. Ideally, I would have liked to devote an entire video to Rene Vincent, but despite his status as one of France's most versatile and stylish illustrators of the 20th century, I just can't find enough biographical information. He was born in the Bordeaux region of France in 1879, and he moved with his family to Paris 5 years later. Vincent initially studied architecture at the École des Beaux-Arts, but quickly swapped to graphics, and even as a student he began illustrating books to make money to fund his education. And with his studies behind him, Vincent quickly acquired some prestigious clients, creating duotone pin-ups and fashion work for magazines such as Rene and Fantasio. It was the frivolous covers and pages he created for La Vie Parisienne in particular which helped to establish him as an illustration force to be reckoned with, and showcased his talent for light comic and erotic illustration. Arguably the most striking thing about Vincent's characters was just how much character they displayed. From young to old, he was capable of capturing nuances of expression and temperament with very few well-chosen lines. Body language and posing came naturally to him, and there was none of the stiffness that was sometimes found in the deco stylings of his contemporaries. It isn't known why, but Vincent signed some of his work with other names, such as Rene Mail and Dufour. But whichever name he used, all his images were amiable and upbeat, usually featuring carefree characters and particularly attractive young women having fun of one sort or another. And his illustrations became emblematic of 1920s Parisian life. The majority of his illustrations were printed in colour, and whether he painted with flat gouache or washes of watercolour, it was always his precise and expressive line, and his flair for well-observed, slightly exaggerated comic anatomy and posing, which were invariably the image's strengths. In the early 1920s, Vincent spent a couple of years in the United States, where he was warmly welcomed by magazines such as Judge and Harper's Bazaar, who were eager to commission him while he was there. When he arrived back in France, he set up his own graphics studio in Paris, and it was at this point that he began creating many illustrated posters and press ads for car companies such as Bugatti and Peugeot, and any number of motor-related industries including Michelin tyres and Shell Oil. Vincent was obsessively enthusiastic about cars, and his enthusiasm fed into a lot of his other illustration work too. Throughout the 1920s, he created many comic postcards, magazine pages, and illustrations for framed prints, which were very popular with the rapidly growing number of French motorists. And he didn't confine himself to motor-related clients, and was also responsible for a lot of other posters, including several for the retail chain Au Bon Marché. He was in high demand from many wealthy clients, and it was through his poster work that Vincent was able to demonstrate the full extent of his stylistic versatility. He continued to illustrate books too, and in 1930 he created a series of remarkably expressive, medically themed cartoons for the book The Stupefactions of Hippocrates, written by Paul Rabou. But due to the financial depression of the late 20s, many of Vincent's clients were tightening their belts, and this led to a serious decline in the volume of advertising work coming his way. By the middle of the 30s, the economy began to recover, but unfortunately for him, he wasn't able to take advantage of the upturn because he died prematurely in 1936 at the age of 57. But during his lifetime, Rene Vincent had created a remarkable and remarkably diverse body of work that few others have been able to achieve, and it seems criminal to me he's not better known or admired. Mexican illustrator Ernesto Garcia Cabral was better known by his nickname El Chango, which is Spanish for monkey. But despite his considerable achievements as an illustrator, few outside of Mexico, and not that many in Mexico, know of his existence. Cabral was born in Veracruz in 1890, and in 1906 he was granted a scholarship to the Academy of San Carlos. He began his professional career at the age of 19 in 1909 as an illustrator for the Tarantula magazine. This work was mostly political, and it stayed that way when he moved to Multicolour magazine in 1911. But as the name of the magazine reveals, he was no longer confined to working in monochrome. Although already 21 and working, he was awarded another scholarship to study art in Paris. But not long after his arrival, funding was withdrawn. But rather than abandon this opportunity and return to Mexico, Cabral supported himself with work for Parisian magazines for the next few years. In 1915, at the age of 25, Cabral left France for Buenos Aires in Argentina, where he worked for several newspapers and magazines. And by the time he returned to Mexico in 1918, there was a clear Art Deco influence to be seen in his images in both colour and black and white. The reputation he had acquired as an internationally published cartoonist attracted commissions from several Mexican magazines, but it was his series of covers for the high-profile publication Revista de Revistas in particular that cemented his reputation as Mexico's finest illustrator. Just like Rene Vincent, Ernesto Cabral was a difficult man to pin down stylistically. The cover art he created at La Revista was clearly Art Deco in nature, and usually involved languidly posed or occasionally energetic females, generally created with a fine but nonetheless calligraphic line. These covers were produced by Cabral as line only, and flat colour was added at printing, which made for a cohesive, recognisable style for the magazine. But on occasion he would break free and head in another direction altogether. More painterly techniques using full-colour print would appear on occasion, and so did varying degrees of sinister, less frivolous imagery. And over the following decades, Cabral's style veered increasingly away from the restrictions of Art Deco. Levels of representation and distortion in his characters varied from piece to piece, but watercolour and pencil combined to create a three-dimensional illusion of solidity in his characters. It was in the 1930s and 40s that Cabral was commissioned to create movie posters for Mexican films, and these featured clean, bold outlines and vivid colour applied with what appears to be gouache or poster paint, but that's me guessing again. Few would imagine they had been created by the same man who had produced the Art Deco Revista covers. Cabral appeared to be untouched by the ebb and flow of market forces in the way that others had been, and even in the later years of his career he was attracting more clients such as the magazine Nueves. His images featured regularly on the covers and pages, and these were usually full colour and created with washes over ink or pencil. Significantly, his keen observational approach to the world around him and the people in it enabled him to be relevant to his readers for successive generations in a way few others managed. And Ernesto El Chango Cabral continued to work up to his death at the age of 78 in Mexico City in 1968. His career in illustration was an astonishing 69 years from start to finish. And that's the end of this instalment. I hope you've enjoyed it, and there'll be more on the way soon. See you then.